All right, Hilbert students, we're going to continue our video series on the causes of the American Revolution. And towards independence, part one, we talked about the French and Indian War. And as a result of the French and Indian War, England is now in debt, and they are forced to start raising taxes. And the population that they're going to direct these taxes at are the colonists. The war was fought in North America to benefit the colonists, and England feels that their citizens are already taxed enough, and it's time for the colonists to pay their fair share of taxes. The colonists are not going to agree. So let's take a look. Learning targets today. We're going to discuss the laws and the taxes passed by Parliament against the colonists. So I'll put them up there and I'll explain them for you. If you got any questions, just contact me. The reason why these taxes were passed, and then the forms of protest that are going to be used by the colonists to fight back against these taxes. So we're going to start with all of those. First thing I need to do is I need to talk about something called Pontiac's Rebellion. Pontiac was a Native American chief, and after the French and Indian War concluded, the Native Americans were not happy with the British. The Native Americans had a great trading relationship with the French, and the French didn't come and try to take over their land. The French got along with the Native Americans. They treated the Native Americans pretty well, and they're not going to get this from the British. Matter of fact, the British are going to stop trading with the Native Americans altogether. And so Pontiac is going to lead a rebellion. And what's going to happen is they're going to attack all British forts west of the Appalachian Mountains. And then they're going to surround a few of them as well. The reason they're doing this is not only is the British not trading with the Native Americans, but you have a whole bunch of settlers coming across the Appalachian Mountains to settle in the Ohio River Valley. Remember, that's why the French and Indian War was fought over that one area of land. And now the settlers are coming, and the Native Americans do not like it, so they're attacking forts, and the settlers begin attacking the Indians, so you got this big old mess. So now British officials are going to set up meetings with the Native Americans. In some instances, they would give the Native Americans gifts. In some instances, some of these gifts might have had smallpox, like blankets with the smallpox germs, which then killed a lot of Native Americans. So, to prevent all this trouble between settlers and Native Americans, the first law is going to be passed by Parliament. Parliament is the body of politicians in England that makes laws for England and the colonies. And they're going to pass the first law. It's going to be called the Proclamation of 1763. And what it does is it draws an imaginary line along the Appalachian Mountains, and it simply states, settlers cannot go west of the Appalachian Mountains. So the Ohio River Valley, which was the French and Indian War was fought over, is now off limits to white settlers. Now, are the settlers going to stop going because there's an imaginary line along the Appalachian Mountains? No, they're not. Could they be in danger if they went west of the Appalachian Mountains? Yes, they could. And so to enforce this, Britain's going to send over 7,500 more soldiers. The colonists aren't going to like that. So what you have here, you've got 13 colonies. This is the proclamation line right there. And very simple. If you are an English settler in the colonies, you cannot go west of the Appalachian Mountains. And they are doing this to make the Native Americans happy and to avoid any violent conflicts that there might be. Okay? So England is in debt after the war. The Prime Minister is a gentleman by the last name of Grenville, Prime Minister Grenville. During our learning about all this, I think we're going to go through 3 different prime ministers. But he says that the citizens in England are already paying high taxes. It's time for the colonists to pay their fair share. And the people of England, they agree with him. Colonists don't, however. And so Parliament will now start passing taxes. The first one they're going to pass is the Stamp Act, 1765. Under the Stamp Act, any paper product that the colonists have to purchase, a stamp needs to be applied to it. And so that stamp is going to cost a little bit of extra money. That's the tax. Colonists don't like this. So paper products, playing cards, newspapers, wills, diplomas, all of these things. When you buy them now in the colonies, you have to pay a little bit extra to have that stamp applied to it. And so the colonists are not very happy. And how do they express their displeasure? There's a whole bunch of different protests that are going to take place in the colonies as a result of all the laws that are going to be passed by Parliament. The Sons of Liberty are going to be formed. Sons of Liberty are going to be a secret organization of male colonists. And their goal is to oppose any of these taxes passed by Parliament. If they need to get a little violent while doing so, they'll do it. If they need to destroy some things while doing so, they'll do it. And you'll see this in the notes. All right. Boycotts. They're going to start using boycotts. Boycott British goods. A boycott is a refusal to buy. When Rosa Parks was arrested because she would refuse to move from her seat on the bus, after she was arrested, African Americans in the United States or in the South, they stopped using the bus. The bus company lost a lot of money. That was a boycott. I know of a tuna fish company. It was discovered that while they caught tuna, they were also catching dolphins, and a lot of dolphins were dying. People found out, they said, oh my God, I'm not buying that tuna fish. That's a boycott. And a boycott is a very effective way to fight back against something you don't like. And it's also a peaceful protest. All right? So they boycotted British goods. They boycotted the paper that was going to be used for the Stamp Act. And then they started hanging people in effigy. That is where you make a dummy of someone, you hang them, and then everyone takes turns hitting them with a stick and spitting on them, and they say, I don't like you. You make a dummy of someone, and you show your displeasure. Foreign countries have done this with American presidents many different times, and I'll never really understand that one. So here is the flow chart to show who has the power. The king. The king is in charge of England. The king is in charge of the colonies. However, it is Parliament that makes the laws. And Parliament makes laws not only for England, but for the 13 colonies, because the 13 colonies belong to England. The members of Parliament are elected to their posts. Okay, so I need you to know this, that the people of Parliament are elected to their posts by people who live in England. We're going to get to that in a minute. 13 colonies had no one in Parliament that they elected. So when Parliament is making these laws for the colonists are saying, wait a minute, we haven't elected anyone in Parliament. They should not be making laws for us. The people who should be making laws for us are the people in our own assemblies and our own legislatures, the ones that we elect. And so because they have no one in Parliament, the phrase that you're going to read and the phrase you're going to hear is no taxation without representation. And the colonists are complaining that, listen, Parliament can't tax us because we have no representation. We have not elected anyone in Parliament. Hopefully that's clear. Another act that's going to be passed called the Quartering Act. And the Quartering Act also passed in 1765. And what this did was it ordered the colonial legislatures, the colonial assemblies, to pay for supplies for the British soldiers who were being stationed in the colonies. So if a British soldier was stationed in the colony, well, what's he going to need? He's going to need candles so he can read at night, or candles, right? He's going to need bedding. He's going to need cooking utensils, even beer and cider. All right? So all of this stuff, the assemblies were supposed to provide for the soldiers. Now, because it cost extra money, colonies saw this as a tax, and they opposed it. They did not like it. The New York Assembly refused to enforce it. And because of that, Parliament said, well, there's no longer a New York Assembly. We're going to make the laws for New York. New York Assembly can no longer meet until they agree to abide by the Quartering Act. All right? So these laws are being passed, and people are getting mad. It's only going to grow. So now you have the Townshend Act. Now remember, I said we started off with Prime Minister Grenville. Now we're going to have Prime Minister Charles Townshend. And Charles Townshend very firmly believes that the colonists should be taxed. By the way, all those forms of protest, the boycott and all that, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act. Repeal means to cancel. So because the colonists were fighting back against and protesting it, Parliament says, okay, we'll take it away. But now Townshend comes along and says, no, colonists are going to be taxed. So he passes the Townshend Act, and it's going to tax a number of things: paper, glass, lead, paint, and a little thing called tea. And tea is going to be the big one. So if the colonists want to buy these goods, they're going to have to pay a tax on them, including tea. Now you're going to learn about the Tea Act in a little while. Please know that tea was not taxed under the Tea Act. It was taxed under the Townshend Acts. So now, colonial protests. Well, we're going to keep up with the Sons of Liberty, whose leaders were Sam Adams, John Hancock, a lot of famous Americans from that time period were members of the Sons of Liberty. They're going to continue with the boycotts because that's effective, but now you got the Daughters of Liberty. Don't ever get the ladies mad. That's not a good thing. And now the Daughters of Liberty are jumping in. They're the ones who are buying goods, right? They're boycotting. And now they're making their own goods. They're making their own cloth. They're making their own tea. They're only buying American-made products. So right now what you see going on here are nonviolent protests. But that's going to change. All right? So in our next video session, we'll get into some more of the taxes, and we'll start getting into some of the events that are going to start becoming violent, which is going to drive the colonists and England farther and farther apart, which they're being driven farther and farther apart with every single law that's being passed that we're talking about right now. All right, so have a good day, Hilbert.